My daughter used my wife's death against me. She told the court my grief made me unfit to manage a company worth $22 million. She thought her lies would bury me. But as she twisted the knife, I gathered the strength to fight back. She will soon learn that I am not as weak as she believes. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. I sat alone in my office that night, the city of Seattle glowing through the wide glass windows behind me. The room was too quiet, too heavy, as if the silence itself was pressing down on my chest. My lawyer's call earlier still echoed in my ears. The words kept circling, pounding against my skull like a drumbeat I couldn't silence. Your daughter filed a lawsuit. She wants the court to declare you incompetent. She wants control of the company. I leaned back in my chair and rubbed my eyes. My desk was littered with documents, reports, and framed photographs from another life. There was a picture of me shaking hands at the ribbon-cutting ceremony of our first office. Another one of Margaret, smiling proudly with our daughter Anna, clinging to her side, wearing that little red dress she had begged me to buy for Christmas. I had worked all those years, believing I was building something not just for myself, but for them, for family. I thought about the sacrifices. They came rushing back in a painful flood. I remembered the $60,000 I paid in college tuition so Anna could study at one of the best universities on the East Coast. Every bill, every semester, I signed those checks with pride, telling myself it was worth it because I was investing in her future. I remembered the $25,000 I spent on that shiny silver car she wanted so badly when she turned 21. I told her it would give her independence, freedom, and confidence. I remembered the $100,000 we poured into her wedding. Margaret and I spared no expense. We rented the big church, the ballroom downtown, and the string quartet. I wanted her to feel loved, celebrated, and supported. I wanted her to know she was the heart of everything. And yet, all those sacrifices, all that love, had turned into nothing but cold betrayal. I whispered into the stillness, my voice trembling as if Margaret were still listening. You were right, Margaret. You always said she needed me more than the company ever did. I didn't see it then. God help me, I see it now. My gaze shifted around the office, landing on the things that had defined my life. The company I built, Hansen Technologies, valued now at over $20 million, was born in a garage 30 years ago. Just me, a second-hand computer, and a dream that kept me awake at night. Every late evening, every missed family dinner, every drop of sweat was poured into that company. It grew from nothing into something solid, something respected. And all along, I thought one day I would hand it down to Anna as a gift, as a legacy. Not like this. Never like this. And then there was our home, the family house in Bellevue, worth $600,000 today, but priceless to me. Margaret and I had chosen it together, painted the walls ourselves, and installed the wooden floors, plank by plank. We raised Anna in that house. Her growth charts were still penciled faintly on the kitchen doorframe. The photos of birthdays, Christmas mornings, and vacations still hung on the walls. That home was supposed to be her inheritance, a safe place that carried our history. Now that too was under threat, just another pawn in her hunger for control. The assets were becoming a battlefield, but it wasn't just about money. It was about blood, memory, and the ties that were supposed to hold us together. Those ties had been cut, and the knife was in my daughter's hand. I closed my eyes and saw her as a little girl again. Anna, no more than 6 years old, was running across the yard to meet me after work, squealing, "Daddy's home!" She used to throw herself into my arms as if I were her entire world. I could still feel the warmth of her small arms around my neck. That memory stabbed deeper than any lawsuit ever could. Because now that same little girl was standing in court, using her mother's death as proof of my incompetence. She dared to tell the world that grief made me unfit to lead. She had taken the love I had for Margaret and twisted it into a weapon. The rage boiled inside me. My throat felt tight, my fists clenched until my nails dug into my palms. I whispered again, this time louder, angrier. "How dare you, Anna? How dare you?" The betrayal was more than just business. It was a scar on everything I believed we shared. For a while, I sat there drowning in that pain. The sense of humiliation, the disbelief that my own flesh and blood could stand against me, almost broke me. But slowly, something else began to rise from that darkness. It started as a spark, then a steady flame. Determination, resolve, a realization that if I surrendered now, she would destroy not only me, but everything Margaret and I had ever built. If I let this stand, I told myself, she will erase us. She will erase everything. I thought of Margaret again, of her voice in those last months, soft but firm. She had warned me. She said, "Richard, she needs your attention more than the company does. She needs to feel your love, not just your money." I had brushed it aside, certain that giving Anna opportunities was enough. Now I saw the truth. My neglect had festered into resentment, and resentment had bloomed into betrayal. But Margaret had also taught me strength. She had taught me never to surrender without a fight. I began to think strategically, shifting from grief to calculation. I would need a lawyer, a strong one. I would need to protect my accounts, freeze assets, and prepare defenses. Every decision had to be deliberate. I told myself, she thinks I'm weak. She thinks age has softened me, but she's about to learn who taught her how to fight in the first place. I turned toward the shelves behind me, pulling down folders, contracts, and insurance papers. My hands moved almost mechanically, but my mind was sharp, cataloging every piece of evidence I might need. The ownership documents, the shareholder agreements, the insurance policies. Proof of my competence, proof of my vision. I knew somewhere among these papers were the keys to dismantling her case. Then I found something that made my heart skip. A contract. It was one of the originals tied to our expansion years ago. But this copy was wrong. Someone had accessed it, scanned it, and duplicated it without my knowledge. My stomach turned. She had been preparing this for months, carefully, methodically. Anna was building her case brick by brick while I was too busy grieving to notice. I pressed the paper flat on my desk, staring at the signature line, and whispered through clenched teeth, "You think you're careful. You think you're ready. But I'll be more careful. I'll be ready for everything." The anger no longer paralyzed me. It gave me focus. It gave me strength. I realized in that moment that the war had already started, and I had no choice but to fight. The office felt charged now, alive in a way it hadn't been for months. The rain outside streaked down the glass like tears, but the city lights flickered back at me, sharp and unyielding. I gathered the documents into a thick envelope, sealing it with a deliberate motion. I held it for a moment, the weight heavy in my hand, heavier than the paper itself. It was the weight of a father's decision, of a man betrayed, of a legacy under siege. I whispered one last time into the silence, "You think I'll sit here and let you take it all, Anna? You think I'll crumble? No, you're wrong. The game is only beginning." The envelope sat on the desk, ready to be delivered to my lawyer in the morning. Outside, the light of Seattle reflected against the wet pavement, painting the office in glimmers of silver and gold. It felt like a signal, a warning of storms to come, but also a reminder. I was still here. I was still standing. And I was not finished. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment one below to let me know you're here with me. I woke before the sun and did not turn on the lights. The house held the kind of quiet that remembers you. The floor knew where I would step. The walls knew what I would think. In the kitchen, I measured coffee and watched the steam curl like a small weather system. Today would not be about grief. Today would be about choices. I carried the mug to my home office, sat at the old oak desk, and looked at the thick envelope I had sealed before midnight. It felt heavier than paper. It felt like a line I had finally decided to cross. The house knew my footsteps. The desk knew my weight and my worry. I was fully awake. Already. I dialed Thomas Grant at 6:30 and braced for voicemail. He answered on the second ring, alert as always. Thomas dislikes speeches and loves checklists. I told him what I wanted. Freeze the secondary operating account. $400,000 sat there for payroll and vendors. Until this storm passed, no one touched it. He asked for the number, the balance, and the current signers. I read each detail slowly, watching the sun slide into the room. He told me he would send instructions to the bank's legal team, notify their risk unit, and copy me on every message. He reminded me to print the last 90 days of statements. Then he said 3 words that steadied me. "Consider it done." When the call ended, I opened our online banking portal. I did not click quickly. I let the numbers load the way a patient waits for a doctor to speak. The accounts appeared. I printed 90 days of statements and spread the pages across my desk like maps. Payroll out, vendor fees, insurance premiums, taxes. It all looked like the heartbeat of a living thing. Then I marked the items that did not fit. A consulting payment of $12,000. A retainer for a public relations firm I had never hired. A wire to a research shop that sells leadership narratives. I circled the dates, wrote the initials of the approvers, and put a question mark beside each. I did not let the question marks lean into anger. I let them stand upright like fence posts. I called the bank and asked for Michael Collins, the manager who opened my first account when I still wrote code in a rented garage. He answered with his steady warmth. I said there was a risk of unauthorized activity and that no access change should go through without written confirmation from me and counsel. He asked if we had fraud. I said we had a family dispute dressed as business. He told me to come in with identification, and he would flag the accounts, add callbacks for any transfer above $10,000, and brief the night staff. He did not ask for details. He said he would be ready. Before I left, I stood and walked the perimeter of my office. My fingers ran along the frames. The first patent, the grainy photo of our 8-person team, Margaret's picture in a silver frame. Her head was tilted, her smile set in that way that told me she had just made fun of me and was letting me catch up. I whispered to the photograph, "I hear you now. I am moving." The words sounded steady. They felt like mine again. By 8, I was sitting in Michael's narrow office while he slid papers across the desk. He explained the freeze, the alerts, the 2-factor changes, and the callback verification for any transfer above $10,000. I initialed where he pointed and signed where he asked. We mentioned the Seahawks and moved on. Before I left, he pushed a receipt under the glass. The freeze was active. In the parking lot, the sky had opened a slit. Sunlight brushed the wet pavement. I ate a ham sandwich in the car and read 2 emails from Thomas. The first confirmed the bank action. The second contained excerpts from Anna's filing. The words sat cold on the screen. Depressive features, impaired executive function, decreased cognitive flexibility following bereavement. There was a neat paragraph that lifted my charitable work in Margaret's name and held it up as evidence that I could not separate emotion from strategy. I let the words sit and cool. Then I forwarded the message to Robert Hayes and asked him to meet me near the lake. Our company, valued near $20 million, was not a toy. Robert arrived with a yellow legal pad and a face that did not express surprise. We took a small table by the window and drank coffee that had been waiting too long. I told him about the freeze, the suspicious vendors, the phrases in the filing that tried to turn love into a diagnosis. He listened and drew 3 short lines on the page. He labeled them people, product, and proof. Under people, he wrote 2 names who would stand for me without being asked. Under the product, he wrote a number that represented 3 years of steady growth. Under proof, he wrote retention and customer satisfaction. Then he closed the pad, looked at me, and said we would move quietly. Not timidly. Quietly. There is a difference. I nodded and felt the difference settle into my shoulders. Late afternoon, I drove to Bellevue for dinner at Anna's. The neighborhood was tidy and careful. The door opened before I could knock. David stood there with a smile that looked practiced. The smell of roasted chicken warmed the entryway like a memory trying to help. Lily ran in from the living room, paint on her fingers, and pressed her face into my coat. For a heartbeat, I forgot war. Anna appeared in a cream sweater and hugged me with the exact pressure you use when you want to look like you mean it. We moved into the kitchen, where everything was the right color and the right shine. We ate at the long table beneath a row of pendant lights. David talked about a library renovation. I asked about the timeline and the budget because those questions are safe. Anna watched me the way people watch a dog that might bite or might sleep. She asked whether I was sleeping, whether I was eating, and whether I had considered getting help to take some of the load. I said work keeps me sharp. The words were true. Then I asked how things were in finance. She said we should not talk shop at dinner and passed the bread. After Lily ran off to show me a drawing of a castle, I wandered to the bookshelves and read the spines. A thick binder labeled Forecasts, another marked Efficiency Studies. I did not open them. Anna came to stand beside me and asked about Robert, whether he still kept a fishing rod in the trunk. I told her he did. She smiled and let the smile fade. Then she said some shareholders wanted clarity on dividends. Her tone was gentle. The number was not. 15% over 2 quarters. I kept my face still. I asked what engine would drive that climb. She said modernization, automation, a tighter ship. I pictured empty chairs where loyal people sat. I pictured customers waiting for a voice that never answered. I said a 15% jump requires more than clever accounting. It requires cuts that make a company bleed inside. She answered that markets reward discipline. I said culture is not an afterthought. Culture is the engine. She rested her hand on my sleeve and said she was only thinking out loud. Then she looked at me carefully and asked whether the work still kept me sharp. I told her it did. I said it slowly, and I held her gaze. I left a little early. On the porch we hugged again, and she told me to drive safely. I said I would. Halfway back to the city, my phone buzzed. An unsigned message waited, no subject line. I pulled under a street lamp and opened it. The attachment was a scan of internal notes from a strategy session. The names were familiar. 2 shareholders who love shiny numbers. A consultant with a smile made of charts. Anna. At the bottom, under a section labeled Messaging, a line sat like a knife. Keep Richard as a ceremonial figurehead during quarterly meetings. Reassure staff while decision authority shifts. I read it once, then again. My anger did not boil over. It cooled. It sharpened. I forwarded the file to Thomas and to Robert with 2 words. We proceed. Figurehead. I said the word in the empty car and heard how it stripped a person into a shape. I read it again, then a 3rd time. I forwarded the document to Thomas and to Robert. I typed 2 words in the body. We proceed. The clean anger that rose in me did not shake. It steadied. Driving home, the city lights looked sharper, as if every bulb had been polished. Thomas texted to say the bank had confirmed the freeze. He said he would send a preservation demand to Anna's counsel at 9 in the morning and request the consultant's records too. He asked if I had authorized any outreach on leadership messaging. I told him no. He wrote good and added that the less we say publicly, the better this plays. I slept a few hours and woke with that feeling a man has before the sky splits. At 9, I sat in a clinic waiting room with chairs designed to lower blood pressure. The doctor was brisk and kind. She ran me through memory tests, planning tasks, pattern recognition, and a routine physical. She treated me like a person and not a file. When we finished, she said what I already knew. I was fit to run a company. Grief is not incapacity. Grief is a companion that sits beside you and is quiet if you show it respect. I thanked her and felt something in me settle to the right height. Back at the office, my assistant, Sarah, had left a manila envelope on my chair. Inside were screenshots from a private forum where employees sometimes blew off steam. Most of it was ordinary. One post stopped me. It said a manager in finance had hinted that a dividend increase would follow if we accepted hard changes. The list looked like a shopping list written by someone who had never cooked. Headcount cuts, automation of support, freezing senior salaries. The tone was cheerful, as if pain were a novelty. I set the paper down and watched a crow land on the railing outside my window. It looked at me as if to say, "Make up your mind." I sat and wrote a letter I did not send. It was addressed to everyone who had ever given us their hours. It said we built this house brick by brick, and we will not swap bricks for cardboard because someone promises fair weather. The letter was good. It did not belong to this day. I saved it and closed the file. Near noon, Robert stopped by with 2 sandwiches wrapped in paper and a list on a folded napkin. We ate at the small conference table. He told me he had spoken to a shareholder who liked quick returns. Robert had let him talk and then asked if he remembered TechFlow Industries, the one that cut deep, automated everything, and watched their stock triple before customers disappeared. The shareholder remembered. He agreed to lunch on Thursday. Robert pushed the napkin across the table. It held 6 words: move slowly, hit hard, leave proof. I put the napkin in my pocket. In the afternoon, Thomas called again. He read to me from a section of Anna's filing I had not yet seen. It cited articles linking bereavement to impaired decision-making, lifted phrases like decreased flexibility and mood dysregulation, and pointed to the scholarship fund in Margaret's name as evidence of sentiment interfering with governance. He let the words hang in the air. Then he asked exactly 2 questions. Do you want a full medical evaluation, and are you ready to countersue if we confirm bad faith? I told him yes and yes. His conference room smelled like polished wood and paper. On the table, he had laid out 3 sets of documents. The leaked meeting notes, highlighted in yellow, where the word figurehead sat like a bruise. A draft letter reminding the board of its duties and requesting confirmation that no off-the-record leadership discussions had taken place. And a preliminary counterclaim alleging breach of fiduciary duty, conspiracy to manipulate shareholder expectations, and interference with corporate accounts. The pages were not theatrical, they were precise. I initialed each one and felt less alone. As dusk settled, another anonymous email slid into my inbox. This one carried a short audio clip recorded in a hallway. Voices bled through a door. Anna's voice was steady, presenting a communications plan. She said my role would be honored in public messaging while decision authority moved to her team. She used the word honored like a curtain you hang to hide a doorway. Another voice asked how long the ceremony would last. She answered, long enough for the staff to stop asking questions. Then reduce it. I sent the clip to Thomas and sat in the quiet until the anger cooled into something I could hold. I made a new list. Evaluation scheduled. Freeze confirmed. Preservation letters sent. Vendor review ongoing. Shareholder outreach in progress. Underline. Prepare counterclaim. Underline again. Then I stood and walked the halls until my mind aligned with the plan. Night fell hard. In the parking garage, the air smelled like wet concrete. I set the briefcase on the passenger seat and said the words out loud, tasting them to see if they still belong to me. They think I have lost, but the game has only begun. The sentence fit like an old jacket that still knew my shoulders. I drove home with the windows cracked and let the cold air remind me I was awake. The next morning, I met Michael at the bank again. An alert showed a failed login from a new device just after midnight. We reset credentials and added a rule that any wire above $10,000 required a phone call to me and to Thomas. He printed the control list for my file, nodded once, and said we were ahead of the curve. Back at the office, Sarah told me a vendor had called to ask why a contract revision had not been countersigned. The email had gone to a generic inbox and used the word urgent 3 times. The revision shifted a service fee by 5% in exchange for bundled analytics we did not need. I asked for the original thread. The sender's domain was off by 1 letter. I thanked Sarah, forwarded the message to our security lead, and added it to the folder marked Attempts. It felt good to name it that. Attempts. I breathed and let the anger blow through and back out the window. By noon, I had a stack of printouts, a thumb drive with the audio clip, and a copy of the clinic's preliminary note stating I was fit to lead. I walked 2 floors down to Robert's office and set it all on his table. He read, without comment, He tapped the figurehead line once and said, "That is the hinge. Intent speaks louder than slogans." He asked if I was ready to move. I said yes. No more defense. It is time to attack. He called the shareholder, who still kept his own counsel, and set lunch for Friday. Late in the day, I met with Thomas again. He had the counterclaim on his screen, the cursor blinking at the end like a small heartbeat. He read the relief aloud. Preservation of communications, injunctive limits on access, sanctions if manipulation was proven. He asked me to review the final page carefully. It allowed him to file without delay when the moment came. I read it twice and signed. The pen left a groove I could feel with my fingertip. Something inside me clicked into place. The air outside had the bright cold of late winter. I walked slowly to my car and thought about Margaret. I imagined her hand on my arm and her voice in my ear. "Be kind," she would say, "but do not surrender your name. Protect the people who carried you. Hold steady." I opened the door and set the briefcase inside. The city was already lighting its evening lamps. I stood there for a long breath and let the view remind me that time keeps moving, with or without our permission. At home, I made tea and arranged the documents on the kitchen table in the order Thomas preferred. I checked each signature and date. The floor Margaret and I installed held my steps. I sat in her chair and let the day replay. The bank meetings, the careful smiles at dinner, the line that tried to carve me into a statue, the filing that dressed love as a symptom. The audio clip that was used was honored like a curtain. My anger had a shape now, a blade. I stood and placed everything back in the envelope. I slid it into the briefcase and closed the latch. In the window, the city looked like a scatter of small coins on black velvet. Somewhere, Anna was tucking Lily into bed. Somewhere, David was rinsing plates. I let that picture exist without poison. I would not grow smaller to win. I would not lie to feel big. I would move with the gravity of a man who knows what he built and intends to keep it whole. I turned off the lamp and walked to the door. I said it once more, quietly, as if Margaret were nearby and needed to hear it. No more defense. Now it is time to attack. They do not know what I hold. They do not know what comes next. Then I stepped into the hallway and pulled the door closed on the soft click that means a plan is in motion and a line has been crossed on purpose. Tomorrow we would file, and the first move would not be theirs. I would not blink, and I would not step back again. Enough. It was time. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 2 below to let me know you're here with me. I reached Thomas Grant's office before dawn, the glass tower still half asleep, the lobby smelling faintly of lemon and copy paper. The city outside was a sheet of pewter. I carried the old briefcase that had followed me through 3 recessions and 2 expansions, and more late nights than I care to count. Today it felt heavier than leather. It felt like a verdict I had not yet heard. Thomas's assistant waved me in. Robert Hayes was already at the conference table with a legal pad and black coffee. He looked up, nodded once, and went back to his list. It was a list of names, the people who would speak for me when a courtroom tried to turn grief into a diagnosis. I set the briefcase down and breathed the way they teach you in the clinic, 4 in, 6 out, so your body remembers that oxygen is not a luxury. Thomas set 3 stacks without ceremony, affidavits from people who work with me, the clinic's evaluation concluding I'm fit to manage, grief present but not disabling, and a counterclaim drafted for filing, breach of fiduciary duty, manipulation of shareholder expectations, interference with corporate accounts. He didn't waste adjectives. He checked dates, clipped exhibits, and said, "This is a plan, not a performance." Robert glanced up from his pad, added 2 names to the witness list, and underlined tomorrow's hearing. "We'll keep our steps small and exact," he said. It felt like tightening a harness before climbing. We reviewed the bank controls next. I slid across the confirmation from Michael Collins at the branch, the one stating in plain language that the secondary operating account, $400,000, was frozen until dual authorization cleared any transfer. Attached was the callback log and a list of alerts we had set for anything above 10,000. Thomas slid the pages into an exhibit sleeve and clipped it shut. "This is prudence," he said. "Not panic. People forget those are different." Robert unfolded a one-page timeline and set his pen on the first block. "People, product, proof," he said. "Today, we show all three. The story matters, but the lines matter more." He had printed 3 years of performance on heavy paper so the slope could be seen across the room. Revenue up, margins steady. Retention is at 94%. Customer satisfaction letters with phrases you cannot buy. Trust, decency, follow through. We arrange the pages the way you arrange tiles on a table before you fix them in place, checking fit, checking flow. Robert underlined one sentence on his pad. "Quiet wins a long day." The last folder on the table was the one I hated. The leaked notes from a strategy session where my name had been cut down to a shape. Figurehead. Keep Richard for optics during quarterly meetings. Reassure staff while authority shifts. Reduce appearances. The word looked even smaller on paper than on my phone. Thomas slid the folder under his arm. "We'll decide when to use it," he said. "Not because it lacks force, but because force works best when it arrives at the right minute." By 8:45, we were passing through the courthouse metal detectors. The hallway smelled of varnish and wet wool. The courtroom itself was paneled in dark oak, the kind of room where words wear heavy shoes. Sunlight pushed through high windows and turned the dust into slow stars. On the right sat Anna with her lawyer, Catherine Doyle, a woman with a posture that made objections before she spoke. David sat one seat back, jaw tight. They looked rested. They looked convinced of the ending they had sold themselves. The bailiff called us to order. Judge Harrison took the bench, papers squared. Catherine opened with a polished narrative. A $20 million company slipping, a grieving executive resisting change, a daughter trying to protect workers and investors. She spoke of modernization, automation, and urgency. She never used the word power. She did not need to. She called Anna. My daughter raised her hand, swore to tell the truth, and took the stand without looking at me. She described my refusal to automate customer support as if loyalty to voices and names were a flaw. She listed benefits we preserved through a downturn and called them expensive comforts. She said the scholarship fund in Margaret's name was noble but misallocated. Then she said the part that turned my ribs to ice. "After my mother died," she said, "my father grew rigid. He confuses tradition with wisdom. He confuses grief with leadership." I watched for flinches and saw none. Thomas rose, calm, and walked the court through 3 exhibits. Performance lines trending up, retention at 94%, letters from customers using words like trust and follow through. Then he set the bank confirmation on the lectern. The $400,000 operating account, frozen under dual control, alerts on transfers above 10,000. That is capacity, he said, not decline. Our first witness was a department head who has worked with me for 15 years. He told the truth the way quiet men do, with small details. He described a morning when I rejected a feature that would have confused older customers, then stayed late to answer 3 emails myself. He described a week when servers were flaky and I stood in the lab until midnight, asking questions that led to the fix. He didn't praise. He recalled. That is the difference that counts. We broke for a short recess. I stood at a window and watched a strip of lake flash between buildings. Robert joined me. "They think they have momentum," he said. "Let them climb the hill." I nodded. Momentum lets you see who trips on loose stones. When we returned, Catherine carried a new binder. She called it an independent leadership assessment. Third party. Rigorous. She talked about methodology in a way that sounded like money. The judge accepted the binder and began to read. Thomas asked to approach. He pointed to handwriting in the margin that did not belong in any independent report. The judge peered at the scrawl, lifted an eyebrow, and asked Catherine if the note was hers. She said no. Thomas asked permission to read it aloud. The judge allowed it. If you add that he is emotionally deteriorated after his wife's death, I will authorize additional fees. The sentence entered the room like a draft that puts out every candle. Someone in the back said, "Oh," and then swallowed it. Catherine said the line was out of context. She said it was not Anna's hand. Thomas held up the email stapled to the back. He read the sender's name, the consultant's address, and the forwarded thread from Anna's account. Then he set the binder down as if it were very hot. The judge's voice turned flat. He ordered preservation of all communications with the consultant. He asked for originals, invoices, drafts, and metadata. He told Catherine she had 72 hours. He did not look at Anna when he spoke. He did not have to. The air had shifted. David leaned forward and then remembered himself. Anna rested her hands on her knees and looked straight ahead, her face arranged like a picture you hang to hide a stain on the wall. Thomas did not gloat. He resumed our case. He moved the financials and retention and satisfaction letters into evidence. He offered the doctor's affidavit and asked to schedule live testimony if needed. The judge accepted the affidavit. 1 page. Clear words. Fit to manage. Grief is present but not disqualifying. No cognitive impairment. It read like a weather report that refuses to exaggerate the storm. Catherine tried to bring the room back to her story. She asked Anna 3 gentle questions. Do you love your father? Do you worry about the company? Do you want to protect what he built? Anna said yes, 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 without crying, without glancing my way. Catherine wanted Mercy to feel like authority. The judge said we would continue the next morning after the consultant's materials were produced. He reminded counsel that courts are for facts, not theater. He adjourned. In the hallway, reporters arranged their bodies like chess pieces. Thomas raised a hand and shook his head. Robert guided me toward the side exit. Behind us, I heard Catherine tell a microphone that they welcomed scrutiny. I heard David say something about doing what was necessary. I did not slow down to catch the words. Back at Thomas's office, the door closed with a click that sounded like a lock on a tool chest. He slid a small stack toward me. Vendor summaries. Bank logs. A pattern no honest budget makes by accident. 3 transfers over several months, spaced like stepping stones, adding to $865,000, routed through accounts that should never meet. My breath came out in a sound that was not quite a laugh. We hold it, Thomas said. Not today. The court gave us a gift. We will use it when it can do the most good and the least harm. Robert put a dot next to 3 names on his pad and circled next week's calendar. We keep our powder dry, he said. I drove to the lake and let the car idle. The water was charcoal. The lights on the far shore looked like punctuation. My phone buzzed. A text from Anna. Can we talk, please? I pictured her at 8 years old, cross-legged on the floor, tracing the wood grain, waiting for me to notice her new shoes. I typed 2 words, "Not now," and set the phone face down. A wind climbed over the hood and walked across the water until the surface shivered itself smooth again. Morning brought the sound of cleaning carts in the hallway outside Thomas's office. He had already drafted letters to the consultant, to Catherine, to their IT firm, to the cloud provider hosting their email. Originals, invoices, drafts, logs. He wanted the path the words had walked. He wanted footprints. Clarity is a form of mercy, he said. We're going to give the court mercy. I thought of Margaret standing by the kitchen window, watching a storm walk toward us, counting between lightning and thunder until we knew how far away it was. I whispered, "We're almost there." By mid-morning, we were back in the Oak Room for a status conference. Catherine's voice was the voice people use after a fire drill. She said they were working diligently. The judge asked one question. Do you dispute the note's authenticity? She said they could not answer yet. He nodded once. He turned to Thomas. Anything further while we wait? Thomas said yes. He wanted the doctor scheduled for live testimony and asked permission to file a supplemental brief connecting the retention data to service revenue. The judge allowed both and set tight deadlines that felt like a metronome no one could ignore. On the way out, Anna stood near the elevator. "Richard," she said, "not Dad, just my name." She said she had never meant to humiliate me. She said consultants twist words. She said she was scared the company would wither under me. I listened. I thought about our house in Bellevue, the one now worth $600,000, where she once waited by the front window every evening. "This company is not a raft," I said. "It is a house. Houses need caretakers, not storms." The elevator arrived. The doors opened. She looked as if she wanted to say my name again. Then the doors closed. That afternoon, the doctor called. She would testify live. She said it simply. I thanked her. "Clarity is a form of mercy," she repeated, as if she had overheard us. I wrote it on a sticky note and stuck it to the top of my screen. At 4, a courier delivered a brown envelope to Thomas. Inside were the consultant's invoices, 2 marked Rush, amounts in bold that did not blush, and a memo using the phrase integration of requested narrative. Thomas exhaled through his nose. "They made the story they needed," he said. "They did not find the truth that was there." Evening came with a thin rain that turned the sidewalks into black glass. I went home and boiled soup. I washed the bowl. I stood at the window where Margaret used to watch the weather come down the lake like a curtain. "We are almost at the turn," I told her. "I wish you could sit in that oak room and feel how truth changes air." The house answered in its own quiet way, boards settling, pipes sighing, the refrigerator clearing its throat once and then quieting down. I slept. On the 3rd morning, the consultant produced everything. The emails matched the copies. The invoices matched our ledger pull. The handwritten note matched a sticky on an earlier draft. Thomas filed the counterclaim at 2:15. The clerk stamped it. The sound was small and final. Service on Catherine was made at 2:30. At 3, the clerk's office emailed to confirm that the continuation would begin at 9 the next morning. Thomas slid the red file into the rolling case and told me to get some rest. "Tomorrow is not the last step," he said, "but it is the step that changes stride." I wore the blue suit Margaret once called honest. The courtroom filled the way a theater fills on a matinee on Wednesday. The judge entered with a face that had already read what needed reading. He asked Catherine if she wished to be heard on the consultant matter. She said only that they regretted any confusion and stood by their concern for the company. He nodded tightly and turned to Thomas. "Proceed." Thomas placed his hand on the red folder and did not open it. He summarized the invoices, the emails, and the note. He did not raise his voice. "When you pay for a story," he said, "you do not buy the truth, you buy the ending you prefer. Courts are not stores." The sentence moved through the room like a bell. He let it ring. Then he called the doctor. She took the stand in a navy jacket and spoke in sentences that ended clean. "Grief is real. Grief is not incapacity. Tests are normal for age. Planning intact, memory intact, judgment sound." She did not polish the words. She put them on the table and left them there. Catherine asked her 3 questions and sat. The judge leaned forward. He spoke to the record about independence, about the danger of shortcuts disguised as care, about the obligation to protect both people and enterprises from narratives bought by fear. He said we would break for lunch and return for closings. He said he would take the matter under advisement immediately after. Robert and I walked 2 blocks under a fine mist. We talked about shoes and coffee and the Mariners for 2 minutes to let our minds cool. Then he stopped at a corner and looked at me. "1 sentence," he said. "Carry it like glass." I already had it. It had arrived the night I first read the word figurehead and felt something old in me stand up straight. We returned to the oak room. The judge invited closings. Catherine went first. She asked the court to consider the long horizon, to weigh my affection for the past against the demands of a brutal market, to remember that love can become a blindfold. She said modernization is not cruelty, and that her client's motive was protection. She spoke well. She always has. Thomas stood. He rested a hand on the lectern and pointed, not with his finger, but with the shape of his sentences, to the lines on the paper and the letters written by customers and the oath a doctor signs. Then he asked the court to allow me one sentence. The judge nodded. I stood. My body remembered how to stand without argument. I built a house for people, not a casino for luck, I said. I have made mistakes. I have grieved aloud. I have worked too late. But restraint is not weakness. It is stewardship. I let the air hold those words. Then I thanked the court and sat. Robert's mouth turned up at one corner. Thomas closed the red folder without opening it. Catherine started to speak, but the judge lifted a hand. I have heard enough, he said. He said he would issue a decision soon. He said the consultant matter would be referred to the appropriate committee. He turned his gaze to Anna and did not say a word. Silence can be a verdict in waiting. As we filed out, David lost the grip he had kept all week. His voice rose and frayed. He said the consultant had steered them wrong, that they only wanted help, that phrases can be twisted by anyone who has ever written a billable hour. Anna touched his sleeve and told him to stop. She looked like the child who once waited at the window at dusk, small against a big house, hoping a car would turn into the drive. Back at Thomas's office, nobody smiled. There is a kind of victory that refuses to grin. Thomas set the transfer stack beside the red file and tapped it once. When the ruling comes, he said, we close the loop with this. I placed my palm on the paper. The cool seeped into my skin. Not yet, I said. But soon. They think they have seen the worst day I can bring. They have not. Night found me at the mantel studying our wedding photo. The kettle hissed. The house breathed. We are almost there, Margaret, I said. Today, the air changed. I sipped tea and listened to rain argue with the gutters and lose. I slept clean. If you have ever been made small in a room you built, you know the ache that lingers even when the room is returned. It sits under the ribs. It waits for you to breathe wrong. You learn to breathe on purpose. I did. I woke knowing what the next chapter would ask of me. And I was ready to answer. Stay with me. The next turn is near. Feeling dismissed, overlooked, or treated like a prop is hard, isn't it? If you believe every person deserves to be seen and respected, comment the keyword, seen. Now let's see what they do to change that. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 3 below to let me know you're here with me. The morning after the storm in court, I walked into the oak-paneled room again. The same smell of varnish and old books lingered in the air, but something in me was different. The heaviness I carried when this all began was gone. In its place stood a firmness I had not felt in years. I clutched the folder that Thomas and Robert had worked on through the night, the one that held the final piece. The transfers, the proof, the trail of money that would silence every doubt and every lie. When the judge called the session to order, the hush that followed was sharper than silence. Anna sat at the table to my right, her lawyer Catherine at her side. David avoided my eyes, but I could see the nervous twitch in his jaw. They looked tired now. The smugness that had accompanied them earlier in the week had melted into caution. They knew something was coming, but they did not yet know what. Thomas stood and placed the folder on the lectern. His voice carried the calm weight of a man who had already measured every word. Your Honor, he began, yesterday we showed that my client remains fully competent to manage both his company and his affairs. Today, we must address conduct that goes beyond simple disagreement about leadership. Today, we must address deception. He opened the folder and withdrew the first exhibit. It was a bank summary printed on thick white paper, stamped and signed by the compliance department. Thomas walked the judge through it line by line. A transfer of $350,000 in June, another of $275,000 in August, a final one of $240,000 in November. Together they totaled $865,000, money taken quietly, rerouted into accounts tied to a shell entity. I watched Anna's face as the numbers fell like stones into the stillness. First her eyes narrowed, then widened. Her lips parted as though she might argue, but Catherine placed a hand on her arm. David's shoulders sagged, his chin dropped. The courtroom murmured until the judge raised a hand for quiet. Thomas turned another page. "These transfers," he said, "were not authorized by my client. They were made under the guise of efficiency, of modernization. But they were thieves. They represent not stewardship, but sabotage. And they were concealed under a story designed to paint my client as incapable, a story purchased, not discovered." The second exhibit was the consultant's invoice, marked "Rush" in bold type, listing additional fees for integration of requested narrative. Stapled to it was the email thread we had already revealed, the one that carried Anna's name in the sender field, offering payment for lines that questioned my mental state. The judge leaned forward, glasses low on his nose, and read in silence for a long minute. When he finally spoke, his words landed like hammer blows. "This court does not condone manipulation of evidence, nor will it permit financial misconduct to be disguised as concern. The facts presented are serious. They warrant not only dismissal of the petition, but referral for further investigation." Catherine tried to rise, but the judge held up a hand. "Sit down, counsel. We will hear no justifications today. We will hear facts, and facts alone." Thomas nodded once and stepped back. He placed the final document on the table in front of me. A declaration affirming my capacity, signed by the court-appointed physician, attached to the exhibits of financial health, corporate performance, and employee retention. It was the sum of everything we had fought for. The judge turned toward me. "Mr. Miller," he said, "you remain the lawful executive of Hansen Technologies. This court finds you competent to continue your duties. The petition is denied in its entirety." He paused, let the gavel fall once, and then added, "As for the financial transfers, the matter will be referred to the district attorney's office for review." The sound that followed was not applause, not gasps. It was something deeper, a kind of collective exhale. For weeks I had been accused of losing my grip. Now the truth was written into the record, heavy as stone. I turned my eyes toward Anna. She had begun to cry silently, tears streaking the careful mask she had worn since this began. She did not look at me. She stared at the floor, shoulders trembling. David whispered in her ear, but she shook her head and pushed his hand away. Catherine gathered her papers quickly, her mouth pressed thin, her career already stained by the revelations of forged narratives. I wanted to feel triumph, but what I felt was heavier. Victory in a courtroom does not erase the betrayal that led you there. As I stood, I whispered so quietly that only I could hear, "Margaret, justice came. But God, the cost is too high." In the days that followed, the consequences unfolded like dominoes. The shareholders who once leaned toward Anna's promises of higher dividends now turned their backs. They demanded her resignation from the advisory role she had forced into existence. Investors pulled support from any initiative tied to her name. The consultant firm issued a public apology, but it did little to shield them from investigation. Catherine faced disciplinary review from the bar. David, who had boasted loudly in meetings about his vision, suddenly found himself excluded from every conversation that mattered. For me, the ruling meant something simple. I was free to lead my company without a shadow of doubt cast over my competence. The company remained mine to guide, not a pawn in someone else's ambition. But more than that, the ruling gave me space to breathe again. For the first time in months, I walked through the office hallways and felt the nods of my employees, not as pity, but as respect. I saw pride in their eyes, relief. Some even stopped me to say, "We knew you'd fight, Mr. Miller. We knew you'd win." Yet at night, when the house grew quiet, the echoes of betrayal returned. I would sit in my study, the lamp glowing over the stacks of old photographs. I would see Anna as a child again, the girl who once waited for me by the window. I would hear her laughter across the years. Then I would remember her sitting in court, paying strangers to write lines about my supposed decline. That wound will never fully heal, but it has scarred over with something harder than flesh. Boundaries. Anna called me once after the ruling. Her voice was ragged, uncertain. She asked if we could talk, if I could forgive. I let her speak for a few minutes. She said she was lost, that grief had twisted her judgment, that David had pushed her toward decisions she now regretted. She asked if I would meet her. I waited until she finished, then answered with words that surprised even me. Anna, I wish you peace, but I will not let you close enough to hurt me again. Blood is not a license for betrayal. This is where we stop. I hung up before she could reply. My hands shook, but my heart felt steady. For the first time, I understood that forgiveness does not mean reconciliation. It means release. From that moment on, I lived differently. I sold the Bellevue house, the one now worth $700,000. It broke me to pack the photo albums, to walk past the pencil marks on the kitchen doorframe one last time. But the house had become a battlefield. I could no longer rest there. I sold it and used part of the proceeds to create the Margaret Foundation, a scholarship fund for young women entering engineering programs. It felt right to transform pain into opportunity, to make sure my wife's name carried light, not shadow. I moved into a modest apartment near Green Lake. 2 bedrooms, warm hardwood floors, a balcony overlooking the park. It cost far less than the house, but when I stood there in the morning with a cup of coffee, watching joggers pass and ducks skim the water, I felt something priceless. Peace. For the first time in years, I was free of the constant hum of obligation. I worked during the day, still guiding the company, but I left earlier, walked more, and cooked meals in a small kitchen that smelled of rosemary and garlic. Anna and David, meanwhile, slipped into silence. They moved out of their home when the mortgage payments piled up. Word reached me that they had rented a small apartment in Tacoma. Shareholders who once entertained their proposals no longer returned calls. Friends grew distant. They were alone with their choices. The contrast between our lives became a lesson no book could teach. Greed isolates, but truth, even painful truth, sets you free. Sometimes people ask if I regret drawing such a hard line. I regret not offering Anna another chance. I answer with honesty. Regret belongs to those who repeat their mistakes. I have learned. I will not repeat. One evening, as I sat on the balcony watching the sunset stain the lake orange, I whispered again to Margaret, "We did it, love. The company stands. Our name stands. But more than that, I stand. Alone, yes, but stronger." The breeze shifted the branches and carried back something that felt like agreement. The lesson is sharp, but it is simple. Parents must know when sacrifice becomes assumption. We cannot give endlessly without drawing lines, or else our children mistake generosity for weakness. And children must know that love is not a resource to exploit, that betrayal is the most expensive debt they will ever incur. In the modern world, money can be borrowed, manipulated, or even stolen. But honor cannot. Honor either stands or it collapses, and once it collapses, rebuilding takes a lifetime. So here I am, 65 years old, beginning again in a smaller home but a larger life. The company remains in my care, but I no longer cling to it as my only identity. I see it as one chapter. The next chapter will be about giving back, about ensuring no other family has to endure what mine did. That is why the Margaret Foundation is not just a scholarship fund. It will also offer counseling for families in crisis, guidance for parents who feel betrayed, and hope for children who feel lost. It will carry forward not just Margaret's name, but her wisdom. She always believed we could turn sorrow into service. Sometimes at night, I hear the phone buzz. I know it is Anna, or someone calling on her behalf. I do not answer. The boundary is firm. She chose her path. I chose mine. The tie of blood may remain, but the bond of trust is gone, and trust is the real currency of family. Without it, you are strangers. I sit in my office at the company now, smaller than before, fewer pictures on the wall, but one thing remains, the photo of Margaret at the ribbon-cutting ceremony. She is smiling, proud. Beneath it sits a plaque I had made last week. Stewardship is strength. That is the phrase I want remembered when I am gone. Not that I fought my daughter, not that I survived betrayal, but I chose stewardship over surrender. The journey has been bitter, but it has brought me here to a place of stillness. I no longer carry the weight of fear or doubt. I carry clarity, and clarity, I've learned, is a form of mercy. As I write the final notes for today's board meeting, I think of what comes next. A new project, a new circle of people who believe in the values Margaret and I held dear. A foundation dinner is planned for next month. There will be students there, hopeful faces ready to build futures of their own. And I will be there, not as a victim of betrayal, but as a witness that dignity outlasts ambition. The company is secure, the house is gone, my daughter is absent, my wife is remembered, and I am free. I look out the window at the park, the leaves trembling in the wind. Tomorrow I will meet with the Foundation's first board. Next week I will walk into a community center and volunteer for an evening literacy class. Life moves forward. The shadows remain behind me. I whisper once more, "Margaret, justice came. But the price? The price was heavy. Still, we are standing." And with that, Chapter 5 closes. When the noise of the courtroom finally faded and the lawyers packed away their papers, I found myself standing at the edge of a new life. I had spent months defending my name, my company, and the dignity Margaret and I built together. Now the verdict was behind me. The storm had passed. What remained was not the wreckage of defeat, but the quiet possibility of starting again. I moved into my new apartment near the park just a week after the ruling. It wasn't the grand Bellevue house with its wide yard and wooden floors we had installed by hand. This place was simpler, smaller, but warm. 2 bedrooms, a balcony that overlooked Green Lake, and a kitchen where sunlight poured in every morning. I bought it for $200,000, a fraction of what the old house was worth, but it felt right. It was manageable, peaceful, a place where I could finally breathe. I furnished it sparingly, a sturdy oak table, 2 chairs, a couch by the window. On the wall above my desk, I placed Margaret's photograph, the one from the ribbon cutting of the company's first office. She looked radiant, proud, full of belief. That picture became my compass, reminding me that dignity, not wealth, was the real inheritance worth leaving behind. From the sale of the Bellevue home, along with a portion of company profits, I transferred $1 million into a new trust, the Margaret Foundation. The fund would provide scholarships for young women entering engineering and technology. It would also support community programs for families fractured by conflict, giving them counseling and guidance I never had. Turning betrayal into service gave me purpose. It made the pain feel less like a scar and more like a seed for something new. Every day in the new apartment followed a gentle rhythm. Morning walks through the park, coffee on the balcony, hours spent at the company, but no longer consumed as a man. I still cared deeply for Hansen Technologies, but I no longer lived only for quarterly reports or expansion strategies. I lived for the balance I had rediscovered, the balance between work, memory, and peace. Anna and David, meanwhile, disappeared from the bright lights they once chased. Word came through old colleagues that they had moved into a small rental apartment in Tacoma. Their names were no longer spoken in boardrooms. The investors who once leaned close to their promises now turned their backs. They tried, once, to reach me. A letter arrived in the mailbox, thick with apologies, asking for forgiveness, asking for another chance. I placed it on my desk and stared at it for a long time. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. The words were heavy with regret, lines of justification, admissions of fear, and promises of change. But when I finished, I folded it back, placed it in a drawer, and whispered, "I don't need their apologies. I have my life now." The boundary was firm. My heart no longer sought reconciliation. Forgiveness, yes, but not return. I realized then that my journey had reached a point of clarity. Parents must learn that love is not the same as endless sacrifice. We give, but we must also set limits, or else our children mistake generosity for obligation. Children, too, must learn that gratitude is the currency that sustains families. Without gratitude, love curdles into entitlement. And in this modern world, where money tempts and ambition blinds, the true test of character comes when power and inheritance are at stake. That is when the mask slips and the real heart is revealed. One evening, something unexpected happened. I attended a local community event at a recreation center near the lake. The Margaret Foundation had just funded a program for foster children, and they invited me to see the work firsthand. I walked into the gymnasium, its walls covered with colorful murals, the air filled with laughter and the squeak of sneakers. Dozens of children played, their faces glowing with innocence, untouched by the storms of greed that had scarred my own family. As I stood by the doorway, a small boy, no more than 8, ran toward me. His hair was messy, his clothes a little too big. Without hesitation, he wrapped his arms around my waist and whispered, "Thank you for helping us." His voice was soft, but it carried a weight no courtroom verdict ever had. I bent down, hugged him back, and felt tears sting my eyes. In that moment, the betrayal, the bitterness, the courtroom, all of it seemed far away. What remained was this: a child feeling hope because of something Margaret and I had started. I wept openly, not out of sadness, but out of release. That embrace was worth more than all the houses, more than all the millions. It was proof that turning pain into service was not just possible. It was necessary. In the weeks that followed, I joined the group more often. I helped with literacy nights, spoke to students about perseverance, and even cooked meals during Saturday gatherings. Slowly, I began to make friends again. People who knew me not as a CEO or a defendant, but as Richard, the man who cared enough to show up. I found joy in the simplicity of those evenings, in laughter that was untainted by greed or suspicion. Every morning I woke early, walked the park trails, and let the sun warm my face. I carried no bitterness. The scars remained, yes, but they no longer bled. They reminded me of boundaries drawn, of lessons carved deep. The final lesson was simple, and it is the one I want to leave for anyone listening. Family is not defined by blood alone. Family is built by respect. Parents must guard against giving so much that their worth is forgotten. Children must remember that love is not owed. It is earned through gratitude and honesty. And as for the world at large, we must all recognize that money can twist truth, but character, true character, cannot be bought, borrowed, or stolen. One night, as the city lights shimmered over the water, I sat on my balcony and whispered aloud, "I don't need their voices anymore. I don't need their apologies. I have my life, my peace, and my truth. That is enough." And in the stillness, I finally believed it. I think of Anna sometimes, not with rage anymore, but with a distant sadness. She and David remain in that small apartment, trying to rebuild. Whether they succeed or fail no longer matters to me. Their path is their own. Mine is here, among the quiet mornings and the laughter of children I never raised, but now help in Margaret's name. As I close this chapter of my life, I know the truth. I have finally begun to live for myself. Not for their approval, not for their demands, not for the endless cycle of sacrifice without thanks. I live for the dignity Margaret taught me to protect, for the peace that comes when boundaries are respected, and for the legacy of turning pain into light. I walk in the park each morning, the sun breaking through the trees, the lake glimmering in the distance. I am no longer weighed down by betrayal. I am lifted by purpose. And as I take each step, I whisper the words that have become my creed. I don't need their apologies. I have my life. I have my peace. And I will live true to myself. And that is enough, because in the end, character is the only wealth no one can ever steal. The story has come to an end. I hope it has brought you valuable lessons and insights. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next video. Goodbye, and see you again.